Well, hello, everybody. I'm Sadesh Girdhari, and you're listening to another episode of CloudStream. We're sponsored by VMware. I am part of the multi-cloud marketing team here at VMware, and this month is Sysadmin month. We're having a lot of discussions with people about how'd you grow your career? What were the steps you took? Where did you start? And I'm super excited. I found an old coworker who recently joined VMware and has been building his career, I'll say for centuries, which may be inaccurate. With no further ado, Olaf, I'd like to have you introduce yourself. I'm super excited that you were able to join us this morning and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're all about. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Sadesh. It's Olaf Gradin. I do have Swedish descent, in case there's a question about that. I am a solutions architect at VMware now as of, I think, 3 weeks, maybe closer to 4 weeks. So very new. I'm just shedding off the human resources training, sensitivity, conduct training, all of that sort of thing. I do have my VMware shirt, but I'm still wearing an older Pivotal shirt right now. So
nice.
Apologies.
I like that. Yeah.
And I have come from a background of IT since the old days. Centuries may be pushing it, but certainly decades is fair.
Oh, there we go. There we go. Much more appropriate, like time horizon. You know,
Right.
My investment advice is always like, hey, what's your time horizon? Right? Are you doing this for 2 weeks or 20 years? That makes a big difference, right? And I think what was cool is when we started talking, I immediately say to most of my guests, I was like, so, hey, where did you start and how did you get your start? And a lot of times we hear about folks that are, involved in internships. We hear about team members who are like, hey, I kind of happened into it. And I thought, your story was a really compelling one because, you get to your senior year of high school and then some opportunities present themselves. So I'll let you kind of tell your story a little bit, and
Sure.
obviously I'll interject with questions about like, hey, so why'd you make that decision? That type of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, so a trip in the Wayback Machine, as we said, decades. So in 1995, I graduated from high school, and leading up to that point, I was generally the IT guy in school. There wasn't exactly that role at the time. The internet was dawning, was just budding. So I worked as the IT guy in my school. This was in high school, this was in middle school. We were on Mac 2Es at the time, doing basic programming. And then in high school, we actually had a technology lab that was a big part of what we did there actually was video production for internal school broadcasts. And so the company that did a lot of our IT or that brought in a lot of our tech was a video production company, an integrator and reseller. And so I was kind of their boots on the ground, hands on the keyboard guy that they could go to and get things fixed without them having to make a trip from Atlanta out to our high school. So immediately as I approached graduation, they hit me up and said, hey, if you are interested, we would love to hire you. And this was Atlantic Video Corporation. I don't even know if they're around anymore, but AVC back in the day.
Nice.
And so I did take him up on that opportunity because I was excited by the tinkering, by the success, the challenges, the artifacts of all of this that was in technology. Though my career ideas were going elsewhere, or at least my aspirational goals in education were going elsewhere.
Yeah.
So, but I thought I would start this job and see where it goes, and perhaps it'll fill a gap.
Yeah.
So I dual enrolled. I enrolled in college, and I also started this job. And I thought we'll just work out the timing, when the time comes and somebody asks. So I think I did that for about a month before I decided that all of my clientele at AVC were universities, military institutes, broadcast stations, film studios, like pretty important customers, pretty important clients.
Yeah.
And I was enamored by that, right? But I also recognized that I was teaching the very people that I would be going to college to learn from.
Okay.
And quite literally. And so I made the choice at some point to punt on college and instead just dive full into this career. And I got to say, I haven't looked back since then.
Yeah. And so what was neat about that is like, we all in tech, I say, take much different paths to our talent or engineering skill. And I think one path is definitely the self-taught path, right? Which is, I never went and got a formal CS degree, right? Along the undergraduate path, I was like, I'll pick up some HTML, some CSS, and then, enough to do what I needed to do for my internships that would later fall into career paths. Unfortunately, at some point I felt, I was, making SharePoint sites, which was not a fun career choice. But, I think it was insightful because then, you started looking at backend data stores, you started figuring out, well, for your example, this video stuff is huge amounts of storage, right? That is required. And then the latency requirements for streaming some of those videos across, I'm pretty sure, which were very low broadcast quality, poor networks, must have been challenging.
I mean, at the time, broadcast quality was pretty hot. We were pushing more pixels than any TV could actually pick up.
There you go, right, because it was over the air, right? Is that?
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. So I'll explain that to my kids one day, what it was like to have fun years and tinfoil. So I think that's what was neat was that, like, how did you step in to, hey, I've got my start. What's next past that? Because I would assume you've picked up a little bit of light programming, you've picked up some operating systems, you've picked up these different pieces from this video experience, and then you're kind of like, all right, I'm ready for what's next. Is that true?
Yeah, the video experience working as a reseller and perhaps more importantly an integrator gave me a tremendous amount of experience with a variety of systems. I was at customer sites, and in fact, I was in customers' basements sometimes in their own little video production studio, and I was interfacing our products with who knows what, right? It could be some custom homemade gadget that I kind of had to figure out how to integrate this. And we also brought on other people that I would then mentor and train and get them out to customer sites, walk them through the steps over the phone. Actually, at the time, we had pagers, so sometimes I would get the page notification that emergency.
Oh, man. On call. I do not miss that. Yeah.
That's right. Right. So I do have, starting then, right, I was working on Unix systems, on Mac systems, on Windows systems. I was on Novell networks, Windows networks. We used, for the Unix, it was IRIX, if anybody knows, Silicon Graphics, SGI. I still love IRIX to this day. I think that was a fantastic, the Indigo, the Onyx platforms, fantastic. But the opportunity to work with all of these different types of systems and get them talking to each other, it was, it made you look like a magician, right?
Right.
You said centuries of experience. Well, I felt like Gandalf at these customer sites where we came in just guns a-blazing and put together a solution using all of these different platforms that in the end gave them an artifact that they could deliver their product and amaze their customers. So just trickle down effect. Everybody was amazed.
Yeah, so what I like about that is like you have an integration experience, you have a support experience, you're you're really kind of going through and having these different roles, and then you're close to the end user. So you see the impact of the software or the hardware that you're putting in place pretty immediately.
Yeah, and another question you kind of led into was what happened after that? Where did I go from there? And to be honest, I didn't deviate real far. I I did move away from video production, although to be honest, I still maintain that as a hobby to some degree.
Yeah.
But I continued down the path of that integration, analysis, architecture kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so I wound up getting into consulting. I did systems administration and kind of owned a data center for a little while. That in the systems administration job, it was taking them from a very archaic system or group of platforms and moving them into a modern set of platforms, which to me felt very much like a consulting gig where I was just a resident.
Yeah.
And then actually moving into consulting where I had multiple clients with multiple challenges that I had to figure out a platform solution to. Just always enjoyed that type of engagement.
Nice. Yeah. And I think, I think there were a couple of things that I look at and I'm like, hey, as you're navigating your career, as you're taking the steps to decide where you go, one of those things is actually, are you interested in the work ahead of you, right? And I think as you were working your way through these different areas of expertise, you're kind of negotiating like, hey, maybe I don't want to be a storage admin, right? Like I'm looking at what that entails. I understand the sub processes for, hey, carving up a storage array or, vice versa. Maybe, whatever the AWS storage buckets are not going to be my nirvana, right? But I do need to understand these things in order to provide the outcome or the experience that I'm driving towards for my customer. And then I think what I was interested in is like, were you self-teaching yourself? What was your learning apparatus? Was a lot of it experience-based? So you're like, oh, well, this looks to operate very similar to the last, system that I dealt with. What was that kind of like?
Yeah, so not having gone to college, and honestly, I don't know if college would have helped me throughout, right? Because technology changed so rapidly, especially in the early days.
Yeah.
I did depend greatly upon my own resources. And so part of that was going to be mentors that I found in my jobs or in my places, right? The groups that I stayed with. So I think in every position that I held, there was always somebody that I could look to as a senior member. And depend upon them to help pull me along. I also have somewhat of an insatiable desire to dig into things, to learn what makes things tick, from the early days, right? From young days. So I think there's obviously has to be an element of your own personal research, your own passion that you put into these projects, and I'll just point out a discrepancy in what you said before. So you were saying that as you move through these tracks, sometimes you find that I'm not into storage buckets, right? This is not my career goal or my plan, my horizon. But I would say that the way that I tackled a lot of this was that I always looked at the problem that I was required on. And if somebody needed me to figure out printers, then I dove into printers and I figured out printers. Because at the end of the day, the one thing it didn't do was stop my career growth, right? Like it always continued to add skills to me, and it always showed value to my employers that I could do more things. And so I would dig in for a time and figure this out, and then move on from there once that solution's been dealt with and perhaps handed off. And I will say I do always look for ways to hand off what I'm working with to someone else so that I can figure out the next thing. So that is always an aspirational goal of mine, is to
so it's like
laser
curiosity.
focus.
Yeah.
It really is.
I think you mentioned two or three things that I thought were really good points. Like the first one was being able to have a mentor to help identify what those growth targets might be ahead, right? The second I really liked was, hey, I am going to solve these problems, right? I may not be the printer expert, but I'll learn enough to get that problem solved. And then the third thing I thought was good was like, as you were moving through those different areas, natural curiosity is a lot of where you found growth overall from your career. And I think there's a lot to be said about, great, we're talking about, growth in career motivation, et cetera, in context of something like multi-cloud, where you're dealing with different platform technologies, you're dealing with different infrastructures, and certainly you're dealing with different architectural, I'll just call them, decision frameworks, where, they will have instrumented one thing one way and another thing another way. And, you may not agree with that.
No, that's absolutely right.
You moved into a role which was essentially building platforms for probably one of the largest transactional databases in I'd say the nation, right? Where you're constantly dealing with lots of different factors, et cetera. And I'm curious, like, getting to that experience where you were building these platforms, what were kind of some of the challenges that you dealt with, or what did you see that kind of made you interested in solving those problems? Because platforms get really, I say they're a really meta concept, right? Like, you're like, oh, I'm a part of the platform team, and then later folks are like, well, what does that really mean? And you're like, well, we're building the next generation of compute for a subsystem of blah blah blah, which supports blah blah blah, and you're like, oh, okay, so you're making things go fast. Yeah,
brilliant.
Yeah, that's right. But for technology team members, et cetera, that can be challenging. I'm really interested, like, what as you went through that experience, as you got into what technologies actually make organizations faster, or have better control, or have better governance, because financial institutions, et cetera. Well,
right.
What was your experience there?
Yeah, so I spent almost 2 decades actually just in fintech alone, and I last worked with a company that handled for the world $75 trillion worth of transaction processing, right? So major player in fintech for sure.
Yeah.
And so developing their platforms, and I started out and ended there kind of in the same position. I was key to platform development, platform establishment, and from the very beginning, we were brought with a challenge statement and also constraints. And there's nothing that I think an engineer loves more than to say, I need you to do X, but in doing so, you must not touch Y, and you must not go beyond Z. Things like constraints make our jobs more definable and more accessible to some extent. So without constraints, then we have no way to really hone in and define a real solution. But with those constraints, we can really get in tight and figure out what is the solution that will solve this problem, and it's going to be unique to the use case. So working in that environment, I felt like having those constraints, I felt like I was actually solving real problems, and you could actually see what the business issues were, and that you were producing results to correct those. And so as you get a taste for that, I think you start looking for it. You start looking for things within the business that these are challenges that I see. And the ones that I saw most often, especially in a company like that, was that the developers had needs that the infrastructure teams weren't solving, or that the business wasn't solving. And so we would start listening to the developers and start having frequent conversations with the development architects, and figure out what are the things that you're trying to solve, or what is the next frontier that you're trying to pass. And then the infrastructure teams would design architectures to support that. So we were given kind of our guiding light, and we had the constraints of the system that we worked within, and we had the standards that it just existed in at the time. And this was an opportunity with every platform that was released for us to solve a development need that directly related to our customers on the back. That's $75 trillion worth of transactions processing.
Nice. And as you were kind of going through that experience, like, one of the things that I found really interesting is that when you get to a point in your relationship with application development teams and platform teams, where you're rapidly allowed to innovate and experiment, you get much larger amounts of traction. Essentially, this is something that's always like, I think when I was in sales was really frustrating, right? Is that usually you're talking to one group of folks, but you may not be talking to both group of folks to get that sort of traction. And there's another problem overall, and that is adoption. I think a lot of folks who are outside of tech just assume that because you bring somebody an easier way to do things, they will immediately adopt it. And I mean, this is true for any product, right? You're like, well, I brought home Ziploc bags, but the kids still just throw everything on the floor, well, that's what they know to do. It's a lot easier, and, et cetera. So like, it feels like adoption overall is one of those considerations to bring these teams together, and not only adoption, but the ability to have some room to experiment as you're making decisions. That might be as simple as, hey, we're going to try out this new database. We feel like it's going to improve, transactional times, or it's got improved logging so we can see higher levels of compliance and governance for audit teams, et cetera, et cetera. I'm curious, did you have direct experience there where you were having to sort of go out, help teams understand the benefit of choosing the right platform for the right task? What was that like?
Yeah, that's a good call out. So I think in all cases, when you develop a new platform, there's going to be a group of individuals that readily take that up.
Yeah.
But in order for you to push it beyond that group, you're going to have to sell everybody else on the same thing, and they may not have the same issues, right? So this is forever the challenge. But I think what I would also add here, just sort of anecdotally, is that to be in IT means that you're one of two things. Either you are open to change in all ways, or you are a change agent. And if you're both, then obviously that's a very great place to be in. But IT changes constantly. And if I get stuck in my ways and think that this is the only way that I can perform this job, or I can solve this solution, or I can deliver this product, then I have become change averse. Or if I develop a platform that I say, this is the end all be all, we need one platform and it will do everything. It is the one ring, right? Then I've now stopped being a change agent. And so this fast developing IT world is going to leave me behind. So I think given that, right, that our challenge as platform innovators is that you develop a platform, you push it hard, and you may be running up against people who are one of those two things, who are change averse or not a change agent. And so they can't echo your sentiment through their organizational structure or through their product team.
Right.
And so that means you have to take this on. And if you cease handling that, like I said before, I get into a platform and then eventually I have to hand it off to somebody else so that I can go on to the next one, right? So if that energy, if the platform required that type of energy to maintain it, then if it moves into a new team of ownership that doesn't have that energy, then it's likely going to fail, right? Unless inertia is just pulling it along. But even if it's not, any platform team has to continually be an agent of change, and they have to be willing to change so that they can evolve their platform to the needs of those developers as they also change.
I think this is brilliant. And it's something that I feel like a lot of times is glossed over because we as I say we as a tech community, a lot of times look at our tools and we're like, well, this tool will improve anyone's experience. The hard part is how the tool is adopted, who's got access to it, what they're using it for, and if it fits within the intended platform, I'll call it architecture, or not, right? And I think a career perspective on this is that if you're not aware of the different ways that folks are going to employ the tool, and if you're not aware of how you would educate, empower, and sell the tool internally to your team members, then you're going to have a tough time once you get to the level of, hey, being responsible for a platform, right? But the same thing is true, going back to storage, network, compute. or even application teams who are creating a feature and they're like, this is the best feature ever. And, if you're a developer for that thing, that's the best feature ever. But, it may not be the best feature if you happen to be an end user and you're like, all I wanted was consolidated login. And what you did is you gave me dark mode. And I don't understand why this feature
exists. Which is good. I mean, we need this.
But just make it easy to log in. So I think that's really super helpful. And, I always like to ask guests on the show, like, one thing that's really important to understand in career growth in tech is also having balance, right? Because there's this need overall to have a creative side when you're still in tech. A lot of folks just look at, I'll say, just look at engineers and they're like, well, they're really great at building things. And, having fun, having that creative outlet lets you come back and think about problems in a constructive way and or a very creative way that really kind of solves for a lot of those things. So I'm kind of, my question is, what do you do outside of tech? What's fun that, for you, and what do you really enjoy? And then, connecting that back, how does that help you become better at what you do? Like that's one of the questions I like to ask.
Yeah, that's a good question. My observation that I've made is that I guess there's one of two things happening here. Either techies are all creative as well, or creative people make really great techies. I'm not sure which it is.
Yeah.
But there is a correlation there, and what I've found is that there are a tremendous amount of people in tech that are or have been involved in music, which to me makes the best analogy of that paradigm ever, right? Because I've got left, right brain kind of thinking, pure artistic, but yet music has mathematical, has rhythm, has composing, all these elements that sort of exist in the tech field as well. So that is something also that I have done, is I've been involved in music most of my life. I have done music professionally, but I don't do that now, obviously. I actually have a tremendous amount of hobbies. So we said earlier that I have characteristics of being curious, and that is certainly true. I never did before, but I've recently started enjoying painting. So I don't like painting because you have no control over the medium. And as an engineer, I need control.
Like very specific. Yeah, I get that. Okay.
The brush moves, right? The bristles, I don't like this. So I always like colored pencils better. But I have found that miniature painting allows me to exact finite control on an object.
Yeah.
And so I very much enjoy that, and I've gotten into that pretty heavily. I also, of course, because of that, or not because of that, but I guess in relation to that, I also do a fair amount of tabletop gaming. With family, with friends, over Discord now. We have done them in person. We always mix these with dinner parties, so I really enjoy cooking as well. And then I have woodworking kind of on the side that I do. So I've got a nice little studio set up with all of my woodworking equipment. I especially appreciate the hand tool kind of stuff, because this allows me to really exert, again, that control and my own power against something that's blocking me.
Nice. So detail, et cetera, et cetera. I also think what's interesting is as you balance creativity with tech, some of the best ideas I've had when I'm solutioning, right? When I'm like, oh, how am I going to solve this thing, have been when I'm not at work focused on that problem, right? When I'm away working on something else, or I'm just thinking through, hey, I gotta go head over to the grocery store, and you're like, well, it's interesting how you create lists. I wonder if this would work,
And you should mention that.
Yeah.
My wife calls me out on this frequently. She calls me out for engineering everything, and so she hates shoe shopping with me, for instance. I actually, so in one of the Spring One conferences that I spoke at, I think I related a story where I actually developed our chore list I have 3 kids, and so they were younger at the time, and so for all of these kids, I developed a chore list. But the way that I did it, I gamified it, right? And so I put it together inside of Pivotal Tracker,
Yeah.
and I built a board, right? And we did an inception on house chore list, and we worked through point poker on figuring out what each of these tasks were worth, and we got everybody assigned, and we figured out what our iteration was. And so, yeah, I took them through the full gamut of.
Nice. Was there a lot of anti-goals?
There were some anti-patterns, as a matter of fact. I had a line drawn, anti-patterns arguing,
Yes.
Nitpicking which chore was harder than the other. These were all anti-patterns.
Very nice. That's super.
So to this day, I still maintain in the stairwell going down to the laundry room, I have a chart up there that's now it's a Kanban chart for laundry, because laundry is kind of single column, right?
Yeah.
So everybody is allowed 2 positions on the board, right? You have a maximum work intake of 2. So everybody has 2 on the board that they can consume, which means that you can't have 2 things in one thing in the dryer and 1 thing folding, and now you're trying to wash something. No, you only have 2 positions that you can use.
Nice. I mean, what's really good about that it provides context as well for thinking through how to solve difficult problems, which we frequently have to do. This has been a great discussion. We're going to switch a little bit gears here and talk about what's been in the news this week. And I think the most interesting thing that we were talking about before was the Hubble telescope. For folks who like staring at the stars,
That's right.
This has been an ongoing
aim
tragedy.
high,
right? And now I understand that they have fixed it, but I think the fix was that they essentially replaced the compute unit and the power processor. They switched over to secondaries for both of those. I do have an interesting story related to this. The recent problem that they encountered, you're right, was hardware fault tolerance that saved the day ultimately, right? And it was actually pretty interesting because they first thought it was a memory error, and they actually had a fault-tolerant memory system that they could switch over to. I mean, that's pretty amazing, right? And then when they did that, nothing changed, right? Same old problems. So they instead started thinking that it might be the power supply. Right.
Always power, right? And so they had a fault-tolerant power supply as well that they were able to switch over to and boot the system, and everything was fine. But Hubble is an interesting story because Hubble is like NASA's greatest embarrassment, but also their greatest success story. Yeah. Because they continue this same thing, right? They continue to fix Hubble every time it has a problem. That's amazing. The forethought that they had to have in order to build a system this capable, this tolerant. So in the early 90s, I was actually at JPL, not working. I was just a kid, but I was at JPL in Pasadena, and I was getting a very special tour because I was with my cousin, who is an admiral in the Navy in charge of the nuclear clock in Boulder.
Wow.
He's specifically a very important person, and so he got me this walking tour into JPL, seriously, just walk in and talk to anybody, right? And so we walked through JPL. Well, at the time, they were fixing that greatest embarrassment right then and there. And it was, once upon a time, the Hubble telescope couldn't see, right? It was blurry vision. It was terrible.
Yeah.
Billions of dollars wasted. Well, while I was there, they had teams working on, I don't remember the specifics of how this worked, but effectively it was the fault tolerance again. They had a second mirror. Right. So the first mirror had aspherical distortion, right? Common lens kind of stuff. So it had aspherical distortion on it, and
it was bendy.
It was tiny. It was tiny, but it made a massive change to the focusing center point. So they had a second mirror, and the second mirror they were able to modify in a way to act as a corrective lens to the first mirror. So they couldn't fix it, right? But they could use that second one to be a prescription lens, contact lens for the first one.
Similar to my glasses.
Yeah. And so they were working on that at the time, and they had this clean room where all these sciencey looking guys in white suits were standing around this crazy equipment that was shielded in tinfoil, for for understanding what that was. But it was really amazing to see that happening, and then I think it was literally like a month later that they announced that they corrected Hubble's vision.
Right, that they made it clear. Yeah, and the shots were amazing. I remember as a kid seeing those shots, and I was like, "Whoa!" So that's what it looks like, And you're like, "Yeah, very very dreamy stuff." Is kind of. So I thought that was super interesting, just for, from a tech perspective. I think there were some other stuff that that happened this week, and obviously focused on multi-cloud stuff that I thought was interesting. The next was that it looks like Microsoft bought CloudKnox, and the goal there is to support private cloud based on. Wait a minute, is this based on VMware, vSphere, and several other clouds? Now, I'm not going to say that the Pentagon made them do this, but it was really interesting that one of the largest contracts in, I think, in government history for cloud, right? Ultimately decided, hey, we're not going to just choose one. We're going to choose these platforms that match our balance. And I think why I was really excited to have this conversation with you is that, even that piece of news just makes you think, like, so these cloud providers are going to have to deal with the reality that I'll say for the last, several decades we've dealt with, which is other platforms exist. You're going to have to run things on other platforms. And by the way, it's going to have to be, secure and efficient across it. But I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are there.
I think that was an interesting story. So I've worked a lot with Azure in recent times. That's primarily what I've come to help with at VMware, as a matter of fact, is our alliance story with Microsoft and with Azure specifically. And what's cool about that is that Microsoft or Azure has had a really good story around sort of that enterprise management, which is just a long-standing success of theirs, right? The whole back office system. So they have a pretty solid design around policy management within their cloud, and their way to then distribute that policy through a hierarchy within your account or your tenant. So CloudKnox, I think, what's cool to me about that is that we're now going to take their successes in that policy management, and we're going to be able to apply that to other clouds. So by them having this product and being able to apply it to on-prem, to other clouds, means that I get the success that I had in Azure with that policy management, and I can apply it from one location to all of my different places of work. And I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, and following that, I don't know if you were responsible for the news this week, but it seems like it. I'll go ahead and credit you for that. I was also reading that Looker is being added to GCP so that you can have
the observability stuff.
Yeah, the observability stuff, right? And I don't know if this is right, but I think Looker is like an Azure product that allows you to have observability across.
So Looker is a Google product.
Sorry.
Yep, and but it has purview over Azure now. I think that's what they added, right?
Yes.
So they've recently added support for Azure, where they had before, of course, GCP, but also AWS was in there.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I suspect vSphere might have been. I'm not actually sure about that, but Looker has observability over multiple systems. So again, kind of that cloud hybridity position that, as you were saying, we all just have to accept at this point that there is no one solution to solve everything, and so we must have solutions that will allow us to work in multiple different fields, multiple different avenues. So yeah, Looker is kind of interesting. Honestly, I don't know how much Looker is used in the enterprise. I feel like there are other products that a lot of us know that give you that data analytics, that give you, and so I'm not sure how widespread that is, but I think it's phenomenal that these companies are starting to add the other products to their observability engines, to their policy engines, to give us choice, right? That's what we all want.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I'll mention, and I realize we are 10 minutes past our stop time, and so
I think this is how we work, Siddesh.
Yes, I agree. Great conversation. Was that I noticed a new company, and this is an interesting, I think, change for all of us in tech. It got funded, and it's called I think it's Vitali, and they're focused on customer success and measuring and showing throughput. And the way I like to think about this is that a lot of times when we have platforms and platform team conversations, we talk about things like how many releases did you make? What's your feature density? And we talk about the things that matter to developers. And this is that next layer past the developer, right? Which is how good was it really for the customer at the end of your feature to sort of observe this. And if I could forecast a little bit of futurism here,
okay.
I think this is going to be part of the next set of measures for DevOps teams and for platform operations teams is, hey, do you have a dedicated customer success measure for your overall operational, release cadence? And does it match that you made 30 releases? No, it matches that those 30 releases were consistent and delivered enough value to drive, whatever it was that you were doing. And that's interesting to me. The whole thing.
I think that what Vitally did there was they deviated from that one-to-one model where you did have a customer release manager associated with a product release, and so they were able to show that value perhaps easier. But what they did was they brought in data analytics to that,
yes.
And so they are now able to take one CRM and then handle multiple customers, right? Hundreds,
yes.
Thousands, whatever it is. And so I think what's interesting there is that we knew the problem, but then it became an issue of scale.
Right.
And we know how to solve scale, right? And that lies in data. And so we can funnel the data together, run the analytics, and produce results that give us the answers that we can then use to help multiple people at one time. Yeah. I think that's phenomenal as well.
Nice. Well, believe it or not, we've come to the end of our show. I'm really excited for next Friday, which will be a mystery guest. And so, you guys will have to tune in to figure out who that is. But Olaf, we've got a lot of other topics and a lot of excitement coming. We've got things like VMworld. We've got Spring One. And then there's a new dev conference, I think, that's launching. I don't remember the name of it. Do you by any chance remember the name of it? It's like related. It's like Dev Loop or something of that nature.
Oh yeah, I did hear that, but I don't remember the specific name. But okay. It was something Loop.
Yeah, and so these are going to be great events for people to learn about, what's coming, what's happening. I will say I'll miss the hallway conversations. I think everyone knows that you don't go to a conference to really attend the sessions. You go to a conference because it's the folks in the hallway.
You got to do 5 sessions a day, sessions a day, and then whatever.
And I look forward to doing this in person, right? So I think next year we're going to have a lot more in-person interviews, which will be not only challenging technically, but also, require a lot more planning for less noisy backgrounds, that kind of thing. I hope to have you on again. And until then, let us know what's happening over in the platforms world and the Tanzu world. And we really appreciate your time. Thanks again.
Thank you, Siddesh. Thank you.
All right.